I'm 10 years old, maybe 11, and I'm sitting on the edge of a couch in my friend's basement, watching 4 other kids play a game I'm not even allowed to touch. It's my friend Matt's birthday party. There's a sheet cake on a card table with the frosting going soft, and a bowl of chips nobody's eating, because the game started 20 minutes ago, and the game's way better than the food. Matt's older brother left a boombox on the floor and is playing the radio low. The dice come in colors and sides I've never seen before. 6 of them, 8 sides, 20 sides, and they make a sound against the table I can still hear. One kid sits behind a cardboard screen with a book open on his lap, describing a hallway none of us can see, and the other 3 are leaning in like he's reading them their fortunes. It's like the most fun I've ever seen. But I won't go near it, because I know what Dungeons & Dragons is. I've been told. I know it's a door, and I know it's supposed to come through the door. I know that the 4 kids leaning over that table are doing something the people I trust most have told me is dangerous to my immortal soul, and maybe even my life. So I sit on the couch and I watch. I want to play so badly I can feel it in my teeth, but I don't move, because the fear is bigger than the desire. Here's the part I remember most clearly some 40 years later. Even then, sitting on that couch, I didn't believe it. I watched 4 kids roll dice and argue about a dragon and eat a birthday cake, and no part of me thought a demon was going to climb out of the carpet. The fear wasn't mine, but it was driven into me by the people who loved me and thought they were protecting me, and I was scared for my soul and also my mom's wrath. I didn't believe it. I was just afraid of what would happen if I took just one roll of those dice. I was born in the 70s, which makes me exactly the right age to have grown up inside the satanic panic. Not an adult watching it on the news, but a child standing in the middle of it, sorting the world into things that were allowed and things that could send you straight to hell. For about a decade, a very large number of Americans came to believe that there were secret satanic messages in the music their kids listened to, secret satanic instructions in the games their kids played, and a hidden network of devil worshippers operating in the suburbs, in the daycares, in the comic books, and the cartoons. None of it was true. Well, almost none of it, but it didn't matter, because the fear did the work the truth never could. This is the story of what that fear did to the things people make, to the music, to the games, the movies, the whole messy business of art. It's a story about who got dragged in front of Congress, who got sued, who got rich, and who got buried. And underneath all of it, it's the question we keep coming back to. When a frightened public comes for the artists, who ends up protected, and who ends up paying for it? The answer is almost never the kids. I'm Lorne Bregitzer, a professor at the University of Colorado Denver's College of Arts and Media, and on Everything is Great, we try to make sense of something that's rarely simple, how the artists we admire and the things they've done shape the way we see their work and ourselves. The Soft Ground. A panic like this doesn't start with the one thing everybody's afraid of. It starts years earlier with the ground being laid out. By the time anyone was burning records or banning a game, the fear had already been planted, watered, and grown. You just have to know where to look for the roots. And the first root was a book. In 1980, a Canadian psychiatrist named Lawrence Pasder published a book with his patient, a woman named Michelle Smith. They called it Michelle Remembers. The book described memories Pasder said he helped Smith recover under hypnosis. Memories of her childhood, when she claimed she had been handed to a satanic cult and made to witness terrible things, sacrifices, torture, and rituals that ran for weeks. None of it was able to be confirmed. No bodies, no other witnesses, no record of any of it anywhere. A Washington Post review that fall called the book an unreal world of mind and fiction. But the book sold, and more than that, it gave people a script. Michelle Remembers was the first book to lay out what became the standard story of satanic ritual abuse. Once that story existed in print, people started finding it everywhere. Pasder and Smith went on tour, they lectured, and they advised police, and a few years later they consulted a preschool abuse case in California that destroyed the lives of those falsely accused and ended with no convictions. We're not going to tell that story today, but the book that helped start it was already on the shelf. The second root was a man. Michael Warnke was a Christian comedian, and through the 1970s and into the 80s, he was one of the most popular acts on the church circuit in America. His story was the draw. In a 1972 book called The Satan Seller, Warnke said that he'd once been a Satanist himself. Not a dabbler, a high priest, he said, running a cult of more than 1,000 followers. This was before he found God and got out. It made him a star. He played something like 200 shows a year. Warnke sold millions of records. He turned up on Christian television, including Pat Robertson's 700 Club, as living proof that the devil was real, organized, and coming for your children. Yet hardly any of it was true. When the Christian magazine Cornerstone finally investigated him years later, they found that Warnke's terrifying cult had really been a small campus club with a handful of members. The high priest of 1,000 Satanists was a college kid playing dress-up. Cornerstone concluded that his book was responsible more than any single volume for promoting the Satanism scare. But that reckoning was still a decade off. For most of the 1980s, Mike Warnke was the expert, and the expert said the cults were real. The third thing wasn't a book or a man, it was the ground itself. By the early 1980s, evangelical Christianity had built something new in America. It had built a media operation with a national reach. Pat Robertson's 700 Club was reaching tens of millions of viewers a month by the middle of the decade. Jim and Tammy Bakker had their own program and their own following. James Dobson's Focus on the Family, which started in 1977, was turning into a radio presence in households all over the country. This mattered because a panic needs a way to travel. A rumor in one church stays in one church. A rumor on a program that reaches a third of the TV homes in the country is a different animal altogether. For the first time, a warning about hidden satanic danger could go out to millions of frightened parents all at once, delivered by people those parents already trusted. And the warnings came constantly. About the music, about the games, about symbols hidden in cartoons and on cereal boxes, and in one genuinely strange episode in 1985, on the corporate logo of Procter & Gamble, the company that makes soap. That one's worth a second because it tells you how strange the air had gotten. A rumor went around that the company's old Man in the Moon logo was a secret satanic symbol, and that the curls in the man's beard hid the number 666. It was nonsense, of course. I remember my friends even showing me that. But it spread far enough and fast enough. In April of 1985, Procter & Gamble held a press conference to deny that it worshipped the devil. Imagine a campaign of misinformation so strong that a company has to hold a press conference to deny they're ridiculous. They hire private investigators. They mailed tens of thousands of flyers to schools and newsrooms to try and knock down a rumor about a bar of soap. That was the world in which the panic existed. A world where a soap company had to go on the record to say it was not in league with Satan. Here's something I didn't understand until I got a lot older. My mother was, and still is, a devout Catholic. The 700 Club was not Catholic television. Focus on the Family was not a Catholic ministry. These were evangelical Protestant operations, and in most years, my mother's church and theirs didn't agree on much of anything. But the Satanic Panic was one of those rare things that crossed the Protestant-Catholic line. The warning about the game, the warning about the music, it didn't matter which pulpit it came from. It reached our Catholic kitchen table just the same. Fear travels better than religious doctrine. So by the early 1980s, the fear had a script, and a star, and a way to travel, and the first piece of art that it really sank its teeth into was a game. In 1979, a college student named James Dallas Egbert III disappeared from his Michigan State University where he attended. He played Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D, and the press decided that the game had something to do with his disappearance. It mostly didn't. Egbert was a brilliant, troubled kid dealing with things that had nothing to do with elves and dice. But the story was too good to check. A novelist named Ronna Jaffe turned it into a book in 1981, and CBS turned the book into a made-for-TV movie that aired in December of 1982. That movie was called Mazes and Monsters. The young actor in the lead, playing a college student who loses his grip on reality because of a fantasy game, was a then unknown actor named Tom Hanks. Think about that one for a second. One of the most beloved actors today got an early break playing a kid driven out of his mind by Dungeons & Dragons, in a movie that taught a national television audience to be afraid of a game their kids played with dice and graph paper. 2 years later, a cartoonist named Jack Chick added his own piece. Chick published tiny comic books that churches gave away by the millions, and in 1984 he put one out called Dark Dungeons. It told a story of a girl whose Dungeons & Dragons habit leads her straight into real witchcraft. It was lurid and ridiculous, and it was everywhere. If you went to a certain kind of church youth group in the mid-1980s, sooner or later somebody put Dark Dungeons in your hand. And in 1983, the fear about the game found its true believer. Her name was Patricia Pulling. In 1982, her teenage son died, and Pulling became convinced that D&D was the reason. Out of that grief, the next year she founded an organization called Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, or BADD, B-A-D-D, for short. Over the next decade, Patricia Pulling would do more than any single person in America to convince police, parents, and reporters that a game was killing children. We'll come back to her because her story is one of the saddest in all of this, and also one of the most revealing. For now, here's what matters. By 1984, before the famous Senate hearing, before the warning stickers, before any of the parts of the story you might already know, the ground was ready. The fear had everything it needed. All it was waiting for was the right place to grow. And it found that place in the one industry that had spent 30 years making loud, strange, threatening art that frightened parents were primed to fear. It found it in music. The sticker. Before I was ever afraid of the game, I was afraid of the music. There were two bands I was scared to listen to as a kid. The first one was Kiss. A friend had told me, and I believed it, that Kiss stood for Knights in Satan's Service. The second one was AC/DC. That one, the same friend told me, stood for After Christ, Devil Comes. Neither of those are true. Kiss is just a name the band picked because it looked good on a poster. AC/DC came off the back of a sewing machine where obviously meant alternating current, direct current. But I didn't know that when I was a kid. What I knew was that there were bands whose names were secret messages, and that the messages were about the devil, and that good kids stayed away. That's the thing about the music side of this panic. For a lot of us, the fear got there first. Before we heard the songs, we heard the warnings about the songs. And in the fall of 1985, that warning went all the way to the United States Senate. It started the way these things often do, with a parent and a record. In December of 1984, a woman named Tipper Gore bought a copy of Prince's album Purple Rain for her daughter, who was 11 years old at the time. The album was the biggest record in the country, the movie was a hit, and Prince was about as famous as a person could get at that time. So Tipper Gore brought it home, and she sat down with her daughter to listen. And then they got to a song called Darling Nikki, one of my favorites off of that. If you don't know the song, I'll say that it opens with Prince describing a woman he meets in a hotel lobby and what she's doing when he meets her, and it doesn't leave much to the imagination. Tipper Gore was, in her own word, stunned. She bought a record for her 11-year-old, and it had a song on it she would have been embarrassed to hear in a room full of adults. Now here's where this whole show's approach matters. It would be easy to make Tipper Gore the villain, and a lot of people did at the time and still do, but she wasn't being unreasonable in that moment. A parent buys a record for a child, the record turns out to have explicit sex in it, and the parent gets upset. That's not a moral panic, that's just a Tuesday. The panic isn't in the reaction, the panic is in what she decided to do next, and in who she happened to know. What she did next was call some friends. In the spring of 1985, she and 3 other women founded a group called the Parents Music Resource Center, the PMRC, and the 4 of them were not ordinary suburban moms with a complaint. Tipper Gore was married to Al Gore, who was then a U.S. Senator from Tennessee. Susan Baker was married to James Baker, who was Ronald Reagan's Treasury Secretary and would later be Secretary of State. Pam Hauer was married to a prominent Washington, D.C. real estate developer, and Sally Nevius was married to the former chairman of the Washington, D.C. City Council. This is the part that matters. These were not people shouting into the void. These were women with direct lines to the most powerful offices in the country. When Tipper Gore decided something should be done about explicit music, she didn't have to start a petition. Her husband was a member of the Senate. Her co-founder's husband sat in Ronald Reagan's cabinet. The complaint went from a living room to a Senate hearing room in about 9 months, and it went that fast because of who was making it. Keep that speed in mind. A lot of other people in this story had complaints too. Patricia Pulling had a complaint. The families we'll meet later had complaints. None of them got a Senate hearing in 9 months. Access is the whole story, as it almost always is. In September of 1985, the PMRC published a list. The press called it the Filthy 15. 15 songs the group considered the worst offenders. Each one tagged for what they thought made it dangerous, whether it was sex, violence, drugs, or the occult. And the list is where the thing starts falling apart if you actually look at it. The 15 songs had almost nothing in common. Prince was on it for Darling Nikki, of course. Madonna was on it for Dress You Up, which is a song about a crush. Cyndi Lauper made it for She Bop, and so did Sheena Easton. And then, right next to those pop songs, the same list had Merciful Fate, Venom, and Black Sabbath. Bands that were singing about Satan on purpose as a costume, in the way a horror movie sells itself on a poster. Think about what that list is actually saying. It's putting Madonna and a Danish metal band in the same category of danger. It's treating a song about a teenage crush and a song full of cartoon devil imagery as the same kind of threat to the same child. The list wasn't a measurement of danger, it was a list of things that made a certain group of adults uncomfortable, and discomfort is not the same as danger. That confusion between what frightens adults and what actually harms children is the driver of this whole era. On September 19, 1985, the Senate Commerce Committee held a hearing on the labeling of records. It was, by any description, a strange afternoon. You had U.S. senators in a formal session to discuss the lyrics of pop songs. You had Tipper Gore and Susan Baker testifying about what they'd found in their kids' record collections. And then you had the witnesses the music industry sent to answer them, who were not at all what the senators expected. The first was Frank Zappa. Zappa was a serious composer and a famously sharp man, and he came to that hearing loaded for war. He called the PMRC's proposal in writing an ill-conceived piece of nonsense. His argument was that labeling records had nothing to do with protecting children. It was about handing a small group of people the power to decide what everyone else's children could hear. He was combative, he was a little condescending, and on the central question of free speech, he was entirely right. The second witness was Dee Snider, the lead singer of Twisted Sister, and this is where it gets good. The senators clearly expected a degenerate. Snider had the hair, the makeup, and a song on their Filthy 15. But Dee Snider in real life didn't drink, he didn't do drugs, he was a married Christian who was about as wholesome as a man could be in that much eyeliner. The PMRC had flagged a song, Under the Blade, as being about bondage and sadomasochism. Snider told the committee on the record that the song was about his bandmate's throat surgery, and that whatever they were hearing in it, they brought with them. It was a quietly devastating moment because it exposed their method. The meaning wasn't in the song, the meaning was in the fear of the listener. And the third witness was one nobody saw coming. It was John Denver. John Denver was, in 1985, the gentlest figure in American pop music. He sang about mountains and sunshine. He was a singer your grandmother loved. The PMRC and the senators seemed to have assumed he would be on their side. Dee Snider himself said later he expected Denver to line up with the people who wanted the labels. He didn't. John Denver sat in front of that committee and opposed the whole idea firmly. He told them censorship was the wrong tool and that it never stops the thing you mean to stop. And he spoke from experience. His own song, Rocky Mountain High, was banned by some radio stations years earlier because programmers heard the word high and assumed it was about drugs. It wasn't. It was about seeing the stars over Colorado. Denver's point was simple, and it landed. People who don't understand a song are not the right people to decide whether anyone else gets to hear it. So the three witnesses the industry set, the provocateur, the metal singer, and the folk saint, all said versions of the same thing. The danger isn't in the music. The danger is in letting frightened people decide for everyone else. And then the hearing ended, and the thing they were all warning about happened anyway. In November of 1985, the record industry made a deal. The Recording Industry Association of America was run at the time by a man named Stanley Gortikov, and Gortikov agreed for the labels to put a warning on records. Not a rating and not a ban, just a small black and white sticker that read, Parental Advisory, Explicit Content. The labels would decide for themselves which records got it. On the surface, that looked like the PMRC won, because they wanted labels, and they got labels. But look at it from the industry side, because the industry knew exactly what it was doing. Congress had been making noise about regulating music. Actual laws with actual teeth were on the table. So the record companies looked at that, and they offered up a sticker, a voluntary sticker that they controlled, and one that carried no legal weight in exchange for Congress going away. It worked. The hearings ended, any legislation died, and the industry walked away having given up almost nothing. If that move sounds familiar, it should. We told the story in our Arbuckle episode, the one about the trial that changed Hollywood. In 1922, the movie studios faced the threat of government censorship after a run of scandals, and they headed it off by promising to police themselves. They hired Will Hayes, they wrote their own code, and they called it morality. It was really just self-protection, dressed up as morality. The music industry in 1985 ran the same play. When a powerful business is threatened from the outside, it stages a cleanup, and the staging is the whole point. The cleanup protects the business. It almost never protects the people the business said it was worried about. And that sticker, the sticker I had on a t-shirt, the sticker did something nobody on the PMRC's side expected. It sold records. I remember the first time I saw one. I was in a record store probably around 1986, and there it was on an album cover, that little black and white box, parental advisory, and I can tell you exactly what it did to me, and to every other kid in that store. It didn't warn us away. It told us which records were the good ones. The sticker was an advertisement. With the best intentions on the PMRC's part, and the most cynical of intentions on the industry's, they had invented the most effective marketing tool for teenagers ever made. They put a flag on the dangerous records, and then they sold the dangerous records to kids who wanted that danger. The studies that came later mostly agreed. Stickered albums didn't sell worse. A lot of times they sold better. The retailers who pulled them, the Walmarts and the Kmarts, just sent those kids to other stores. The whole effort, built to protect children from explicit music, ended up advertising explicit music straight to children, with a federal hearing's worth of free publicity attached. Sort of a precursor to the Streisand effect. So that was the music fight. It was loud. It went all the way to the Senate. It produced a famous hearing, a famous list, and a sticker that backfired. And when it was over, the people at the center of it were mostly fine. The record companies were fine. Tipper Gore went on to become the wife of the Vice President of the United States. The artists, by and large, got more famous. Almost nobody got hurt. Hold on to that, because it's about to stop being true. While Washington was busy with the music, there was another fight going on at the same time. It was over the game from the cold open, the one I was too scared to play at Matt's party. The fight that never got a Senate hearing. It got something quieter, and in the long run, something much worse. It started with a grieving mother. Her name again was Patricia Pulling. The Manual. Patricia Pulling's son was named Irving, though everyone called him Bink. In the summer of 1982, when he was a teenager, Bink Pulling took his own life. And in the wreckage of the worst thing that could happen to a parent, Patricia Pulling went looking for a reason, as many do. She found one in a game. Bink had played D&D. Not long before his death, a curse had supposedly been placed on his character during the game at his school, and Patricia Pulling became convinced that this was the thread that led to losing him. She believed the game had gotten into his head, that it blurred the lines between the story and the world, and that it had taken him from her. There was no evidence for any of this, but grief doesn't run on evidence. Grief runs on the need for the loss to mean something, and a game was something she could point to and fight. So she fought it. In 1983, she founded an organization to do exactly that, called Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, or BAD, B-A-D-D. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to turn Patricia Pulling into a fool or a fanatic, and she wasn't either of those things. She was a mother who just lost a child, which is a grief most of us can barely stand to imagine. Everything she did after that came from a real and bottomless place. The tragedy of Patricia Pulling isn't that she didn't love her son, it's that she loved him completely, and her love got pointed at the wrong target, by a culture that was ready to hand her one. Over the next decade, BAD became the center of the anti-D&D movement in America. Pulling wrote a newsletter. She also wrote a book in 1989 called The Devil's Web. She gave lectures all over the country, and she did one thing that turned out to matter a great deal. She got herself a private investigator's license, and she started presenting herself as an expert on occult crime. That word expert does a lot of work. Patricia Pulling had no training in psychology, criminology, or theology. What she had was a dead son and a certainty as to why. But certainty, delivered with confidence, can look a lot like expertise, especially to people who are already frightened. She actually began training police officers. She put together slideshows and seminars. She traveled to law enforcement conferences to teach cops how to spot satanic activity in their own towns. Pulling claimed at one point that a measurable share of the population were practicing Satanists. The number had no basis on anything, but she was the expert in the room. She said it with confidence, and so the warning spread. Then the mainstream press picked it up. In 1985, the same year as the PMRC hearings, the most respected news program in America ran a segment on the dangers of Dungeons & Dragons. It was 60 Minutes. Ed Bradley, one of the most trusted journalists of his generation, walked a national audience through the claim that a game was driving teenagers to violence. The segment took the fear seriously. It gave it the weight of CBS News. And for a lot of parents watching at home, that settled it. If 60 Minutes was worried about D&D, then D&D was worth worrying about. I felt this one directly, the way every kid my age felt it. By the mid-1980s, the game had a reputation on the playground, and the reputation had nothing to do with the game itself. It was just a known fact, the way kids know things, that D&D was dangerous, that it was satanic, that the kids who played it were a little suspect. And here's what I remember most. It split us. There were houses where you could play, and houses where you couldn't, and the line ran straight down the middle of my group of friends. Matt, whose party I told you about, his family let him play. Mine did not. My mother heard the same warnings Patricia Pulling was spreading. thing, filtered through our church, and in our house the game was simply off limits. So I became the kid on the couch. I watched my friends do the thing I'd been taught to fear, and I told myself I agreed with my mother, and some part of me knew even then that I was missing out on something good. The company that made Dungeons & Dragons watched all of this happen. TSR, the publisher, had a decision to make. They could fight back, defend their game, and point out there was no evidence behind the accusations, or they could try to make the problem go away. They chose to make it go away. In 1989, TSR put out a new edition of the game and quietly rewrote it. The words demon and devil came out, replaced with invented terms, Tanari and Batsu. That meant the same thing, but didn't ring the same alarm bells. The assassin character class was entirely removed. The art got cleaner. The company never quite admitted this was about appeasing its critics, but the timing told the story. After years of being accused of trafficking in the demonic, the makers of D&D reached into their own game and took the demons out. We've seen this happen before. It's the same thing Penguin did years later when it quietly rewrote Roald Dahl's books to sand down the parts that might cause a modern reader to flinch. When the pressure builds, the company doesn't wait to be forced. It censors itself first and calls it caution. TSR wasn't protecting its players from anything because there was nothing to protect them from. It was protecting itself. And what was the truth of it underneath all the fear? The truth was that none of it held up. Every lawsuit Patricia Pulling brought against TSR, against schools, against the people she blamed, got dismissed. Investigators who actually looked into the supposed link between the game and teen violence found nothing. There was no wave of D&D murders. There was no satanic network recruiting kids through hobby shops. Researchers who studied the players found that they were, if anything, a little more socially connected than their peers, not less. The game was a group of friends sitting around a table telling a story together. That's all it ever was. But here's what Patricia Pulling left behind. Even after the lawsuits failed, she had built and tested an idea. The idea that when a young person dies, you can put the thing they were reading or playing or listening to on trial. That a book or a game or a record can be hauled into a courtroom and blamed for a death. Pulling's version of that idea never won. Her cases got thrown out, but the idea didn't die with her cases. A few years later, it came back. Not over a game this time, but over a record. Not in a quiet civil suit that got dismissed, but in a courtroom in Reno, Nevada, with two families who lost their sons, and a heavy metal band on trial for it. That's where we're going next, and I want to be careful with it because unlike everything else we've talked about so far, this is the part of the story where people actually died. The trial. On the night of December 23, 1985, two young men named Raymond Belknap and James Vance spent hours in a bedroom in Sparks, Nevada, drinking, getting high, and listening to records. Belknap was 18 and Vance was 20. They were friends, and by every account, they were both having a hard time. Both of them grew up in homes with more than their share of violence and instability. Both dropped out of school. They were the kind of young men the country wasn't paying much attention to, the kind nobody was really keeping track of, especially in the 80s. That night, the record they kept going back to was an album by the British heavy metal band Judas Priest called Stained Class. And at some point in those hours, the two of them had made a pact to end their lives. They walked to the playground of a church nearby, and they went through with it. Raymond Belknap died there. James Vance survived, but he was badly hurt, and he lived in pain for 3 more years before he died of his injuries in 1988. I'm going to slow down here, because this is the heart of the whole episode, and it asks the most of us. When something like this happens, the people left behind need to understand why. We've seen it twice already in this episode, with Patricia Pulling, and with the families on the PMRC's list. A young person is gone, the grief is unbearable, and the mind goes looking for what caused it. Something you can name, something you can blame, and something you can take to court. The families of Raymond Belknap and James Vance found there's something in the record. In 1990, they sued Judas Priest, along with the band's record label CBS Records. And the theory of the lawsuit was this. Hidden in one of the songs on Stained Class is a track called Better By You, Better Than Me. There was supposedly a subliminal message. 2 words, buried under the music, too quiet for the conscious mind to catch, but loud enough, they said, to reach down into a listener and take hold. Those 2 words were, do it. The case went to trial in Reno, Nevada in the summer of 1990, in front of a judge named Jerry Carr Whitehead, and it was one of the strangest trials in American legal history, because to argue it at all, the court had to do something genuinely absurd. It had to put a heavy metal record under a microscope and go hunting for demons in the grooves. The band's singer Rob Halford took the stand, and Halford did something that probably did more to win the case than any lawyer's argument. He sat in that courtroom and played the record. He played the song forward, backward, and slowed down, and he showed the court that if you go looking for hidden phrases in random sound, you'll always find them, because that's how human ears work. We're pattern finders. Play anything backward long enough, and you'll hear words that aren't there. Halford turned up all kinds of accidental phrases buried in his own album. None of them sinister, and all of them were meaningless. His point was simple. The message wasn't in the record. The listener bought it. The same way the PMRC brought sadomasochism to a song about throat surgery, and the same way a grieving mother brought a curse to a game. Halford made one more point that cuts to the bone. He told the court that the whole idea made no sense, even on its own terms. If a band were going to hide commands in its own records, why would the command be one that tells your paying customers to die? You'd tell them to go buy another record. The accusation didn't just lack evidence. It collapsed the moment you thought about it for 10 seconds. In August of 1990, Judge Whitehead ruled for the band. He found no credible evidence of any intentional subliminal message on the record, and he found what the science had said all along, which is that there's no good evidence subliminal messages can make anybody do anything, much less take their own life. Judas Priest won. The record was not guilty. This wasn't the first case of its kind. A few years earlier in California, the family of a young man named John McCullum sued over a different song, Ozzy Osbourne's Suicide Solution, after their son's death in 1984. That case was thrown out too. The courts in the end would not hold a songwriter responsible for what a listener did. On the legal question, they got it right. A record is not a weapon. A song can't reach inside a person and make the choice for them. But here's where I have to stop and say the thing the show exists to say, because it would be easy to end the story right there, with the ban cleared and the lawsuit exposed as junk science, and file the whole thing under something ridiculous. A lot of tellings do exactly that. They make the families look ridiculous. They make Judas Priest the heroes, and everybody moves on. I don't want to do that, because two things are true here at the same time, and the entire point of the show is to hold both. The first thing is that the music didn't kill Raymond Belknap and James Vance. That's not a close call. The record was innocent, the science was clear, and the verdict was correct. The second thing is that Raymond Belknap and James Vance are still dead. They were two young men in real pain, from real circumstances whatever they were, long before either of them had put a record on. And when their families went looking for the reason, the culture handed them a heavy metal record. Because by 1990, we had spent a full decade teaching each other that the danger to our children was hidden in the music, the games, and the art. The trial put a record on trial. It was never once put on trial the things that were actually breaking these young men for years. The poverty, the violence at home, the schools that lost them, the country that wasn't looking. The record was the easy answer. The hard answers were sitting in the room the entire time, and nobody subpoenaed a single one of them. That's the real cost of a panic. It doesn't only ruin the falsely accused, it lets the true causes walk away unnoticed. While everyone was busy searching for a rock album for two whispered words, the forces that were actually breaking young men like Raymond Belknap and James Vance kept right on working, unnamed and unbothered. There's one more irony to think about before we leave Reno. The band at the center of all this, Judas Priest, the supposed agents of satanic death, were nothing of the kind. They were working class guys from Birmingham, England, who made loud music for a living. Their singer Rob Halford has spoken openly over the years about his own faith, and he's far from the only one. A striking number of metal musicians the Panic painted as devil worshippers turned out to be ordinary, thoughtful, and sometimes deeply religious people. The cartoon was always a cartoon. There was a person behind it the whole time. Raymond Belknap and James Vance deserved people who were looking out for them and asking what they needed while they were still alive. Instead, they got a country that only got interested after they were gone, and mostly to argue about a record. The verdict protected the band, and Judas Priest deserved protecting, but nobody in that story ever protected the two young men it was supposedly about. By the time the culture finally showed up for them, all it had to offer was a lawsuit. The basement again. That basement, the one from the start of all this. The kid on the couch, watching his friends play a game he was too scared to touch. I told you at the start that even then, I didn't really believe what I was being told to be afraid of. The fear wasn't mine. It was driven into me by people who loved me. So let me tell you how it all came out, for the Panic and for me. The Panic ended the way these things usually end, slowly and then all at once, mostly by its own hand. The experts turned out to be frauds. Mike Warnke, the celebrity ex-Satanist who terrified a generation of churchgoers, was finally investigated in 1992, and the investigation tore him apart. His cult, his high priesthood, his 1,000 followers, all of it was invented by him. And here's the part I find genuinely moving. The people who exposed him weren't atheists or skeptics out to embarrass the church. They were Christians. Two writers at an evangelical magazine called Cornerstone did the work, because they actually cared about the truth, and they decided that a lie told in the service of their faith was still a lie. The same world that produced the Panic produced the people who finished it. It came apart everywhere at once. An FBI agent named Kenneth Lanning spent years investigating claims of satanic ritual abuse. In 1992, he published a report concluding that the vast satanic networks everyone was afraid of simply didn't exist. He looked. There was nothing there. Patricia Pulling kept campaigning against D&D until she died in 1997, and after she was gone, BAD quietly folded. The PMRC never formally shut down. It just faded. And the warning sticker, the one souvenir the whole music fight produced, is still technically with us, sitting on streaming songs where nobody under 40 even knows what it's supposed to mean. As for the game won completely. The thing my mother wouldn't let me touch is now one of the most beloved hobbies in the world. When the show Stranger Things put a group of kids playing D&D at the center of the global hit in 2016, nobody panicked. People thought it was sweet. They were right, it was always sweet. It was always just kids around a table telling a story together. The game I watched from the couch and wasn't allowed to join. Which brings me to the part this whole episode has been building to. A few years ago, my son joined a role-playing game club at his high school, a D&D club, and when he told me, I was happier than I knew how to explain, because I got to drive him there. In a world that hands teenagers a glowing screen and tells them to disappear into it alone, my kid wanted to sit at a table with his friends and make up a story together, out loud, the oldest thing there is. I wish I could have done that when I was his age. I wasn't allowed, and now I'm the one who gets to say yes. Thinking about why I made the opposite choice my mother made. And I want to be careful here. My mother isn't a villain. She loved me completely, and she was frightened for me. And the thing she was frightened of came to her from people she trusted. In a decade that was working overtime to frighten her. She did exactly what Tipper Gore did, what Patricia Pulling did, and what those families in the Reno courtroom did. She took the love she had for her child and pointed it at the target the culture handed to her. The target was wrong, but the love was real. Those two things don't cancel each other out. They just sit there together the way most true things do. That's the whole story in the end. Everywhere you look here, you find the same pattern. Frightened people who love their children, and a long line of companies, networks, and operators who turned all that fear into money, ratings, votes, political careers, and a sticker that wound up actually selling more records. Tipper Gore became the wife of a vice president. Geraldo got his ratings. The labels got their cheap deal. The fake experts got rich. And the people who actually paid for it were the ones the panic claimed to be saving. It was the kids who got pulled out of the game and away from their friends. It was the families torn down the middle. And it was the two young men in Reno who needed somebody to look at their lives. Instead, they got a country that would only look at their record collection. I kept this episode inside the arts on purpose. The panic didn't just stay there. In other rooms, it put innocent people in prison for things that never happened. But that's a story for another day. Nothing about this was simple. The fear was real, and most of what it feared wasn't. The people who spread it mostly believed it. The people who made money from it mostly knew better. And the only thing that ever truly protected anyone was the slow, unglamorous work of a few people who insisted on the truth, even when the truth was less exciting than the lie. This episode is dedicated to Raymond Belknap and James Vance. The world argued about them instead of helping them. They deserved better than that, and they deserved it while they were still alive. I'm Lorne Bregitzer with Everything is Gray. Thanks for listening. This episode was written, edited, and produced by Lorne Bregitzer.